and we're going to talk about this wonderful book, But Will You Love Me Tomorrow? And one
Okay.
of the co-authors is with us today, Laura Flam, and we're so happy to have her with us. Her partner in crime on this wonderful history of girl groups is not with us today, Emily Leibowitz, and we're sorry she's not here with us. But Laura, welcome to the
Thank you
show.
so much. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
And so the name of our show is Let's Talk. So let's talk about these wonderful girl groups that we have been loving for years, and we can continue to sing those songs, those of us of a certain age. We're talking about the Chantels, the Blossoms, the Dixie Cups, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, the Marvelettes, the Ronettes, the Shirelles, the Supremes, of course, the Velvelettes. That's just a few of them. But talk about this wonderful history and the research that went into compiling an in-depth uh, overview of these girls and what they mean to the American music landscape.
Oh, absolutely. And a little earlier, we were talking about overlooked women, which I think that the women of the girl groups definitely fall into this category. We define the girl groups as 3 to 5 member young vocal harmony groups that were inspired by and came out of doo-wop and R&B in the 1950s. And these were a bunch of young girls who took over the airwaves of the radio, flew up the charts. The song "Will You Love Me Tomorrow," on which the book is titled by the Shirelles, was their first number one. And the genre of girl groups is so, the music is so important. You know, you just joked that people of your generation or your age grew up on it, but somehow it's the music that every generation since the generation that grew up on it has also grown up with. And so it's this remarkable group of songs and that everybody knows and they're on all the time. Yet the voices of those songs, the women that voice them are pretty mysterious and have been pretty overlooked in history and music history and also in history, because not only did they record all these wonderful songs, but this was the 1950s and 60s, which was obviously a decade of so much change, a time of so much change in the country. And they were ended up being real warriors at the forefront of the civil rights movement too, in the 50s and 60s, touring. And just another thing that they're not given credit for when you hear the song "Be My Baby" that you don't think of.
Well, it's interesting in terms of part of the overview that you just gave. You talked about doo-wop, but basically, I've always felt that the term doo-wop was applied to male groups of that era versus the girl groups. And one of the things that we spoke about when I interviewed you a little while ago was that the girl groups may have been considered the first in what we call the pop music category.
Absolutely. The girl groups did come out of the guy doo-wop groups because they were living, in New York City, most of the girl groups that made it really big and that we cover in the book. And there were, literally there were groups on every corner singing harmonies. The Chantels, that were one of the first girl groups that came out with their song "Maybe." The Chords, who sang "Shaboom," were on their block, and they saw these guy groups and thought, we can do this too. But in terms of the music that they created, it's true, it was not doo-wop and it was not R&B. It was a new genre that Judy Craig, actually, from the Chiffons, who sing "He's So Fine" and "One Fine Day," two of the songs that are just part of, the collective consciousness of this country. She's the one who originally said, I believe we were the first pop artists, and we really believe that it's true. They ended up also sort of creating this prototype that has been used over and over and over again by other pop artists and girl groups who've gone on to, there are girl groups now, and there have been girl groups in every decade, huge famous girl groups. Without the Supremes, we wouldn't have Destiny's Child and we wouldn't have Beyonce. So not only do they have these incredible songs, but they also really empowered a whole generation of young girls to go out there and say, you know what, if they can do it, I can do it too, and start their own musical careers.
Well, yes, and as you mentioned, the chiffons. Will you love me? Will you still love me tomorrow? The song that kind of uh, gave us the title of your book. That was written by Carole King. We know who she is, and her ex-husband, the late Jerry Goffin. But then let's talk about, I'm sorry, yeah. One Fine Day was the Chiffons. Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow was recorded by the Shirelles. And then let's talk about some other ones. The one that you mentioned a little while ago that was a part of the Phil Spector Wall of Sound music, Be My Baby by the Ronettes, and a group called the Bobettes. They came out of Harlem. They recorded a hit, Mr. Lee. But one of the things that the book touches on, yes, it goes kind of like decade by decade and trends. It's an easy read because you have applied titles to each of the chapters that allows the reader to jump around. People do not have to read this in a chronological order. Maybe there's a certain decade that the reader is interested in, and based on the title of the chapter, you can go right there. Can you talk about in terms of how you organize the information, because it is an American music lover's guide to this style of music?
Thank you for saying that. That's a wonderful compliment. So the book is formatted as an oral history, meaning it is told in the first person by the people that were there, singers, producers, songwriters, people that were in the room, which is something that we really felt we wanted to just present a place for women to express, to tell their own stories. We didn't feel as authors that we should be an authority of deciding what a truth was. You know, everybody has a different idea of what happened, of what they were even told at the time. So the way that the book is laid out is pretty much chronologically, starting out in the mid 50s and ending in present day, though the real most of it ends around 1965, when the music kind of falls out of favor. And it's a lot of the groups had a lot of similar collective experiences. You know, they met as young friends, or they were family members who, you know, had a vision and rehearsed and made their own clothes, or, you know, came up with their looks. And so we wanted to make sure that it wasn't the same people saying the same thing over and over again. So we basically use different groups to sort of buttress themes to carry you chronologically through the book.
And one of the issues that came out, which probably impacted a lot of groups of that era, one, they really weren't getting paid very well. And two, many of them were actual composers of their songs and of their hits, but they were not given the credit for being the composer. Therefore, whenever there was a gold record award or a Billboard listing of where the song falls on the chart, the attribution was given to somebody else, perhaps their manager or maybe somebody else at the record label.
Yes, one of the biggest tragedies is how many, you know, the publishing is where the money is in the music
Right.
industry. So as an artist, you have a hit, that gives you the opportunity to go out and perform live and to make money there. And you're of course dealing with promoters, you're dealing with managers, which is where a lot of the shadiness comes in. But also a lot of the early groups, the Bobettes, for example, wrote Mr. Lee, and they were a little bit of an outlier because they were on Atlantic Records, who told them to open a publishing company and put their names on the song. So when you hear Mr. Lee, that is a song that the publishing went to the correct artists. But songs like Maybe by the Chantels, you'll, you know, and there's a group called the Clickettes that we feature in the book. You know, a lot of times they would get the record and there's their manager, their record label owner, you know, as the person who credited for writing the song. And nobody knew at the time that these songs were going to be so valuable and that we were going to be talking about these songs in 2024. Everyone thought at the time that it was a flash in the pan. So no one really knew how much money we were talking about. But also the early groups, the Shirelles, the Chantels, the Bobettes, were writing a lot of their own things. And it feels like as soon as the music industry saw how much money there was, and there was in publishing, a system came into place of professional songwriters. And it became almost impossible to write your own song as an unknown artist and come in and get it recorded, because At that point, there were songwriters who wrote all of the songs, and people like Carole King and Jerry Goffin and Neil Diamond, Ellie Greenwich and Jeff Barry, who wrote Be My Baby and Chapel of Love, and we talk about it in the book. And so it feels like an opportunity that the industry took away from young independent artists to actually make a lot of money in songwriting. And artists did take it back, because in the mid 60s, when the British invasion, meaning the Beatles, came, a lot of people saw them writing their own songs and playing their own instruments, and they were inspired to do that instead. And so people started writing their own songs again. But for that moment in time, from the 50s and the early 60s, it was all professional songwriters. And so.
And I just want to remind our listeners who we're speaking with. We're speaking with Laura Flam. She is the co-author of But Will You Love Me Tomorrow? The article, I wrote an article about it. It is on the Washington Informer website, so you can do a search on that. But Will You Love Me Tomorrow, or Girl Groups. And before we close out, you've made a very important point about the ownership. We've got female artists today like Beyonce and Taylor Swift, who are owning their property. In fact, Taylor Swift had to do what I call a roundabout in order to get that ownership of her stuff back after it was given to somebody else. But she's on top as well. And some of what's happening with these girl groups that we've been talking about, this year is the 60th anniversary of Chapel of Love by the Dixie Cups. I know a lot of folks remember that. And Barbara Ann Hawkins, who is an original member of the Dixie Cups, she is still performing. In fact, she's going to be at the New Orleans Jazz Festival this year. So they're still out there, and they're still helping us to remember. And I just love how you've talked about the importance of this legacy and what it means in terms of understanding fully another aspect of American music. We don't want them to go away. We want them to be remembered. Talk about that a little bit before we close out.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, not only are the Dixie Cups performing at Jazz Fest, but the poster is those women, and is the Dixie Cups, which is a huge honor, and we were very, very excited to see and ordered it. It's a beautiful poster. The legacy of the girl groups, Judy Craig, again from the Chiffon, said, we went through what we went through, so artists coming after us would have it a little easier. And at the time that these girl groups were out there, they were really the first. They didn't have any lessons to look at artists who came before them and say, I know what happened to these people. I'm calling a lawyer before I sign anything. And so, one part of their legacy, I think, is inspiring so many other women to start their own careers and to be so much more empowered in those careers. But there are a lot of stories of positivity and friendship, but there are also a lot of painful stories in the book of being exploited in various ways. And the women of the girl groups collectively, this is a very small moment, very early on in their lives. These are women now that are mostly in their 80s, and they have this very unique experience of having moved and continuing to move people all over the world and being part of something that is bigger than them as individuals, and their lives just taking on this course, this completely unexpected course where they just will live forever through their songs. So it is something that is I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question or not, actually, now that I think about it.
Fine.
But it's something that is very beautiful and unique and special. And a lot of people have approached my co-author Emily Leibowitz and I and said, oh, it's so sad what happened to so many of the women, which is true. But there is this other side, which is just the side of how much they've changed the world, how much they've changed individual people's lives. And so it is so important to realize who those women were. This song, the Shirelles, who sings this song? How did she come to sing this song? These women play an important part in history and in our everyday lives. So it's very important, in my opinion, to learn their stories and to learn from them.
Well, thank you again to you and Emily for bringing this history to us. I hope that we can show the book cover again as we're closing this interview. But Will You Love Me Tomorrow?
I happen to have it sitting right here, so here it is.
There it is, folks. This is a wonderful, wonderful documentation of an important part of music history. And thank you. And we'll turn the show back over to Denise. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody.